So, welcome to the Topos Institute's workshop on finding the right abstractions for human flourishing. I'm David Dalrymple, also known as Davidad. I'm a research fellow at the Future of Humanity Institute and a research scientist at Protocol Labs. And my interest is, among other things, in the intersection of AI alignment and category theory. So I'm very excited to be speaking about this today. And I'm here with Jaan Tallinn, who was a founding engineer of both Skype and Kazaa, and as co-founder as well of the Cambridge Center for the Study of Existential Risk and the Future of Life Institute. And he's also very interested in AI alignment and as well peer-to-peer systems and a little bit of category theory too. And our purpose here is basically to help set the context for this workshop, finding the right abstractions for human flourishing, which there's a lot of context. It sort of a priori maybe sounds a bit strange as a combination of things. But hopefully by the end of this conversation, you'll agree with us that this is actually a really central and critical kind of work to be doing at this point in human history. So let's start with talking about AI impacts, which is one of the main motivators for people to start getting into this direction. As AI gets more advanced, what could go wrong?
Yeah, that seems like that is like a very open-ended question. Yeah, like one kind of, I think there's like a balance between like trying to be kind of abstract and hedging yourself and being kind of concrete and visualizing things that go wrong.
Yeah.
So like
a couple of concrete scenarios.
Yeah. So one kind of middle road that I have kind of in some ways kind of discovered over kind of thinking and talking about it for a long time is just like environmental disaster. Like it's kind of very like if you look around you, that is a very, very, very unnatural place in the universe. And like any deviation towards like universe average, even a slight one, is going to kill us in a matter of minutes. And this one, furthermore, is very unlikely to be an optimal environment for AI. In fact, like I think last year, Microsoft dug up their server farms from under the ocean that had been there for several years and found that they had been doing great. Because the reason why they were doing great was that there were like kind of there were two main reasons. One was lack of people, and B, lack of oxygen. So that
right.
gives you like idea that we might lose once they start optimizing the environment to their preferences.
Mm-hmm. What about more abstractly, or also more less dramatically? What's a sort of gradual scenario where it sort of looks like business as usual, and yet somehow things go very wrong by the end of it?
Yeah, how we, the metaphorical frog, are going to be boiled.
Yeah.
Yeah, the framework I kind of tend to think about this recently, and in fact, like just recently gave a talk about it in the European Parliament in their online event, obviously, is that you can think of AI. The essence of AI is automated decision making, and like the AI adoption basically is in that frame delegation of human decisions to increasingly competent and fast and powerful machines. So like the obvious thing that go wrong is that we do the delegation too quickly and in areas that are potentially needed for retaining control. Because like as everyone who has delegated anything knows that whenever you delegate, you're potentially gaining capabilities, though not always, but you're almost always losing control. So like over the outcomes. So there's actual balance. The humanity is in the process of delegating its decisions to non-humans, and we should kind of really take care, even though like commercial pressures and military pressures are kind of pushing ourselves to do that quicker and faster and less carefully.
Yeah, could you say more about that? It's sort of surprising a priori that you would expect people to delegate to to deploy and to delegate to really powerful AI systems without having solved sort of basic safety things, like it doesn't suck all the oxygen out of the atmosphere.
Yeah, so I think this is like there are like annoyingly unprincipled, but like very understandable historical reasons for this. And I think the main reason is that we just have a wrong model of AI. We think of it as just yet another machine. And like what could possibly go wrong with just like turn it off. I mean, literally, this is like probably the most common objection to my work in the last decade is that why don't we just turn them off? And it's like, when one answer is like, well, sure, but then we should also solve the nuclear arms problem. We just don't use them. So right. It's like, yeah. So the problem is that we have been kind of getting very comfortable with our machines, and the sort of entire idea of technological progress. I mean, Steven Pinker, I think to his detriment, has been kind of pointing to the past as like a great progress, and hence what could possibly go wrong in the future, because things have been going great. So yeah, I think that there's like historical reason we have been just like vastly underestimating the control problem.
Mm-hmm. I'm interested in sort of the comparison between AI technology and nuclear weapons technology. What's some of the things they have in common, and some of the key differences?
Yeah. So one really interesting thing that they have in common, I think, is that in the context of Manhattan Project, humanity did its first existential risk research piece, which was report LA 602, where people considered that what is the probability of the first nuclear detonation igniting the atmosphere by basically turning the entire planet into a giant thermonuclear bomb. And the interesting bit was that there was a decade in our history during which basically from mid-30s to mid-90s, mid-30s to mid-40s, during which we really didn't know, are we going to survive this first impact or not? And I think we are in a similar situation now, where people are throwing more and more compute towards models that we really don't know, in the hopes that something good will follow out of them. And in some ways, just like the Manhattan Project scientists did like a actual bet, what is the probability that the world is going to be still there once they push the button? I think like at some point, sort of AI scientists would kind of have to do similar bets, like will the world still be there once they complete this next multi-million or even billion-dollar training run?
How could it possibly go that you turn on $1 billion training run to learn what the captions of images should be based on all the text on the internet, and then before it finishes, the oxygen is gone? How could that possibly go?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is sort of like super speculative, obviously, and kind of leans on sort of abstractions or metaphors that aren't really kind of category theoretically solid, which is the first hint about the discussion.
Yeah,
is that, for example, if you look at evolution, like in the recent years, AI safety community has kind of figured out this problem of inner alignment. So the idea is that when you have an optimization process, such as evolution, that is producing optimizers, such as organisms. I mean, almost all organisms on this planet are in homeostasis, which is a form of optimization. So like at least in kind of a technical sense, there are optimizers. That evolution is an optimization process that produces optimizers. And like on that level of abstraction, like whenever like machine learning team is producing new training run, they're basically starting an optimizer to search for models, but those models can kind of contain optimizers if like getting optimized or including optimizers would would get them a better match to the selection criteria that they're using in their training run. So like one sort of uncomfortably hand-wavy answer is that we are throwing the knowledge of the world at a training run and then just like replicating something that evolution did, where there are like kind of sub-processes in that that are looking at the data and in some sense thinking about, wait a minute, what is this thing? What I was born into?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have some interests by this, like that were given to, that I was endowed with accidentally by this system, by this like semi-random stochastic process.
Mm-hmm.
And like as an agent, I'm supposed to like climb my incentive gradient and have this data about the world that is outside. Looks like I'm not outside. How can I get outside? So like, and to go from there.
Yeah, it's a scary possibility.
And again, it's like one important thing to keep in mind is that I think people constantly make the mistake of underestimating the processes. Like, I mean, a trillion parameter thing is like it's just, we have the scope and sensitivity. It's like, well, it's probably more than 3, right? Well, yes, but that isn't saying much. So it's like just a kind of I think we need like more humility about like throwing $1 billion worth of electrons at the physical process.
Yeah, I wonder how you've found the rate of progress in the last 10 years or so in AI capabilities. I find that every time there's a new announcement, almost every time I'm slightly surprised. I say, I was expecting this capability a few months from now. And then I update, and then I'm surprised again the next time. What's your view of that?
Yeah, I have very similar. I mean, I think the big caveat really is that I do give like significant, like, or non-trivial, I wouldn't say even significant, but non-trivial credence to my friends like Gary Marcus that go like, yeah, this seems impressive, but when you're going to look under the hood, there's really nothing there. Mm-hmm. And I think like there might be a world where they are right in a very important sense. That there is something very crucial that we are missing. I mean, the evidence that the AI is still like just ridiculously data hungry. Stuart Russell says that we don't have textbooks with 10 million pictures of giraffe. So it's like, no, it's just like you need just one picture of giraffe to get the concept across. And like the fact that AIs really are super dumb in that sense, it's still like non-trivial probability that this points to something really important thing that we're doing. We as a civilization are doing wrong when it comes to AI capabilities. But I don't give like a lot of, I certainly like with my sort of security mindset hat on, I don't rely on that Gary Marcus being right in order to feel secure that my children are going to live.
Right. Do you have a number, a subjective probability that you can put on sort of, there's going to be another AI winter, that this will sort of reach its limits before?
Yeah, I think that's a different question. Like, will there, like, it's still possible that we are missing some really important bit about AI and like getting to human. I think I have like, I think my median is somewhere that, my median pretty much agrees with Ajay Agotra's AI timelines report, which said like somewhere in the late 40s or something like that, or early 50s is the median. So like, yeah, I have a significant probability that we still have like 100 years to go. But it's not like, yeah, it's not, yeah, it's less than 50%. But I do not expect AI winter still, even if you have like 100 years to go. Like the thing is like right now AI is already profitable. Like why would people stop making money? I have like very little belief in people wanting to stop make money. So I really don't expect any more AI winters.
Do you think the sort of research that's at the cutting edge at DeepMind and places like that is profitable? A lot of people say that these are money-losing prestige efforts currently, and sort of speculating on getting past some level of capability where it does become massively profitable.
Yeah, so I do have this model that Caesar Shaharavein Christ and Drill and the City, which is basically, you can imagine like a small city that is clustered around drilling operation. And like there are like basically the tip of the drill is kind of drilling into intelligence and optimization technologies, going from like linear regression to convex optimization to finally like I think the transformers were the last thing unearthed 4 years ago. And like tip of the drill is basically places like DeepMind, Google Brain, OpenAI. And then there's like a large cluster of kind of underground things that just like take those discoveries and implement them.
Right.
And I think like what the model says is that like the AI winter is not going to happen because there's already enough kind of material dug out from the ground to have like sustainable, economically sustainable thing. Even though like the things at the tip might be not profitable in a very, very similar sense that kind of fundamental physics research is usually not profitable. It's in some ways, it's crazy to say like I'm going to start a startup. We're going to do fundamental physics research and then have an advantage over a competitor. I think like it's kind of less drastic in AI research, but I think there's a very similar reason. Like it's kind of people who actually want to be economically profitable quickly. They shouldn't do fundamental AI research, but like still, it's because this is like a quickly advancing area. It's still possible that you do some fundamental breakthrough and be just the first one to get the goods, so to speak.
I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the upside of this as opposed to sort of the risks and the timelines. What's your dream scenario? What's the best case scenario with how the development of AI could work out?
Yeah, that's another open-ended question. So yeah, I don't think I have like kind of a sort of very strong selling point, so to speak. I do see some like very encouraging trends. I would say like the chief among them is that many kind of new entrepreneurs, not just in AI, but other potentially powerful technology domains, they sort of realize that they're doing a double or like dual use thing. They're introducing a dual use capability to the world, and they are kind of themselves interested proactively kind of lowering the risks and ensuring that it will be used for good. And in that area, I think it would be very useful to think about sort of large-scale incentive designs, because currently what I see that the world is in some ways kind of doing this like in a very unprincipled way. We kind of let VCs who are profit maximizers to fund like entrepreneurs, and then like there's like a non-profit sector trying to do the homework for the first kind of people. But I see like more and more people in the like first category are kind of realizing that wait a minute, like we should be doing the homework, and like perhaps not let like profit maximizers in as the first step in our journey, and like can we do that in a more principled way that kind of incorporates sort of safety. I've been starting to call it like end-to-end safety. Can we have like AI companies, AI teams that are doing end-to-end safety in the sense that like they're not going to tackling it on from once they can afford to hire a first safety person, but like actually from the beginning think about, okay, who are the people who want on our team? What is the bylaws? Who are the investors? And like how are we going to proceed? What are our policies for kind of competition, etc. In that sense, like I think like OpenAI's charter is like an awesome example of development like that.
Yeah, I want to sort of talk about not just the safety aspect of mitigating the risks, but to sort of show that there's actually there's a positive side where the development of sort of general artificial intelligence general problem solving capability sort of can solve problems in general. Basically, all the problems that we currently face that aren't directly AI related. If we had AI that was aligned, then we could probably find solutions. Everyone could basically have what they currently want. This is the idea of Prototypia, as Eric Drexler puts it. Is that part of your vision for the future?
Yeah, sure. I have mentioned the concept of Prototypia in many contexts. I do think it's a powerful abstraction, and we should kind of really think about it. And also the general idea of using AI to align AI seems like a valuable thing to think about. Obviously, it sounds like very kind of risky and path dependent way to solve problems, develop something powerful in order to control something powerful.
Right.
Which way? How can you be sure that you're not kind of having some kind of weird race condition that's going to still destroy the world as a side effect? And this is actually one way, another place where category theory might help. You might have if you're building on some solid abstractions, how to solve this effective how to get invariance out of this dynamic process.
Bootstrapping situation where we formally verify a certain class of systems as safe and use those systems, although they may not be able to do all the things we want. We may be able to use them to solve safety problems for a more general class of systems.
Exactly.
Do all the things we want.
Yeah, there is I guess a larger class of, and I recently also been promoting it, this division of AI into AI that does have an implicit or explicit model of humans, and AI that doesn't. And it feels like the second category seems like a much more safer thing to have. For obvious reasons, it's easier to debug if this thing doesn't have a model of the debugger, and it's kind of it seems less creepy, less manipulative potentially. I mean, obviously less manipulative, strictly less manipulative than AI that has explicit or implicit models of humans. So is it can we kind of delineate this category of AIs that I mean, category not in a category theoretical sense perhaps, but yeah, a group of AIs, that we can be fairly certain that they do not model humans, and then we use those as a tool to shape the AIs that potentially do.
Yeah, another sort of type, if you will, of safer AI would be AI that is not goal-directed, or that doesn't have drives to make things happen in the world. Which is sort of potentially another level, if you can combine that with it's not modeling humans and it's also not modeling physical reality. Then
traditionally over the last decade there has been a lot of going back and forth and a lot of confusion about this thing called goal-directedness. I mean, starting from the early days, people go well, we just develop an oracle. What could possibly go wrong? And then people go wait a minute, it's still an optimizer. It's still interested in kind of giving you answers that it is confident are true. What if it wants to make those true? So it's and then people go wait a minute, what is this goal-directed thing? So yeah, if you can have a more solid understanding, and if you can be less confused about what it means to be goal-directed, and then have kind of delineate classes of AIs that are safe in that sense in a very fundamental way.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of potential for this. That the state-of-the-art sorts of ways of approaching goal-directedness involve these set theoretic first-order logic quantifications of suppose that there exists a utility function and a prior.
Argmaxing, yep.
And then there start to be questions about, what if you just had something which behaved as if it was an optimizer, but it didn't have the explicit representation? Could that make a difference? And these sorts of things, I think, could potentially be a lot easier to work with some tools from category theory, basically things with different internal state spaces, but that have equivalent behaviors. And quotienting by simulation is sort of like taking the skeleton of a category and saying anything that is isomorphic in this category of simulations is I don't want my definitions to be sensitive to that kind of thing, because those kinds of representations are not accessible are not accessible to us as testers of an AI system. And so that can sort of place a constraint on what kind of definitions we choose, what we define as goal-directed, for example, or what we define as having a human model. And in a certain sense, having constraints makes it harder to come up with something that satisfies the constraints. But in another sense, constrained optimization problems are easier than unconstrained optimization problems because the search space gets smaller, and it becomes easier to do the reasoning to get to something that does satisfy the desiderata. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, I would say like a large problem right now is that we kind of like discovered this like gradient or meta gradient in AI design space. And people just like throwing more and more money and resources that way in order to hope like there will be like something, there will be like inscrutable blob that will fall out, but perhaps we can coax it to doing something useful.
Right. That's exactly how people treat GPT already.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
So another thing I wanted to talk about is finding the right abstractions in a sort of more societal context, or as part of a global system. Yeah, do you have any sort of hopes or thoughts or vague sketchy directions of how we could reason about that?
So yeah, one. I mean, I've been a big fan of blockchain technology for the last decade, really, and I do think like one potentially really important thing that blockchain brings to the world is ability to have like a sandbox that might not even, but gets less of a sandbox over time to experiment with mechanism design. And people are doing just that in blockchain space, like just thinking about it. There's like a kind of boom in cryptography and mechanism design right now because there are like kind of actual applications that you can just like commit to blockchain and see like how they work. And so like in some ways my kind of hope is that when we kind of think of I'm not sure if we already talk about the delegation problem. I think we did. So like if you think about that, one goal that we should have as a civilization is to make our social fabric more robust towards to introductions of non-human entities that are surprisingly capable in many like relevant, many important dimensions. So like in some ways we are kind of disturbing the natural equilibrium that we have in this world, and can we use kind of a mechanism design that is in some ways kind of made into applications via blockchain or some other means, but blockchain seems like particular low-hanging fruit that kind of create like incentive landscapes in a way that makes the social fabric kind of less vulnerable to sudden capability gains, sudden like non-human decision makers, sudden capable non-human decision makers in the graph.
Yeah, there's something interesting about how blockchain and AI in its current form are starting to provide tools for solving coordination problems.
Yes.
Blockchain is sort of providing this trustless, decentralized database, and narrow AI is providing classification and prediction in the way that it does. And we can use those components as resources that the philosophers and economists and political theorists of even 15 years ago wouldn't have thought that they had available for sort of designing a social fabric to be robust against these strange kinds of disruptions, or even against individual people doing the everyday sorts of profit maximization that they have for the last couple hundred years. Yeah.
Also, I would add that there is interesting, especially in the West, there is now like people who like in the general population. Turns out people who think that AI will be harmful now outnumber people who think that AI will be helpful. So it's like I think it's like important political trend, and I don't think this is true about blockchains.
Right.
So I think that's like a sort of very strong sort of perception advantage that blockchains kind of have in larger society versus AI. I think Peter Thiel said that blockchain is libertarian and AI is communist. So I think it kind of captures some essence of the perception.
Right.
So I think on a meta level, I think it's like also valuable to think about how to use the positive perception as like a potential differential between like two like very cutting edge technologies to make take like the edge off of AI, but not just in terms of perception, but like actual sort of social to level that is kind of socially dangerous, kind of take the edge off of that feature of AI by kind of having like a stronger blockchain/mechanism design component.
I feel obligated to mention that there is a growing backlash against blockchain because of some, basically because of Bitcoin's energy consumption.
Oh yeah.
I think Bitcoin's energy consumption is pretty ridiculous, but it's also not representative of blockchains in general. And hopefully we'll see more and more blockchains that don't rely on wasteful work.
I would say that it's like still, if you did like a survey about blockchains, I would still bet that like they have like a much more positive view among society in general. But also importantly, I think the objections to that are in some sense kind of less fundamental than AI, because like AI is going to literally kill you, whereas like blockchains, like you need to kind of you need some kind of like secondary effect for blockchains to kill you.
Right. Oh well, a normal climate disaster. But yeah.
Yeah. That's an example of a secondary effect, indeed.
Right. Okay, so I want to turn now to sort of how math and mathematicians may be able to help with this stuff. So yeah, there's one route which you've alluded to involving mechanism design and deploying mechanism design by blockchains. But I wonder if you have some thoughts of sort of technical problems that pertain to the direct AI alignment question that mathematicians can help with.
So I already noticed that Scott Garbrandt did tap into category theory when he was developing his work or paper about Cartesian frames, which is like again long time confusion in AI community in general, I would say, not just in AI safety.
Yeah, question of what is an agent?
Yeah. So it's like one obvious answer is that kind of generalization of Scott's work. Like, are there other ways? And we already mentioned about goal-directedness. I think that sort of like fundamental ways how we as civilization again are kind of completely confused about AI and agents. So like using category theory like to build like solid mathematical foundation that would kind of inform further research is like an obvious answer. And the other one might be like value aggregation. And I mean, you have thought a bit about this, like how do you like? I guess like it's like another example of things that people are confused about. How do you aggregate values of two different agents in a multi-agent system in a way that is kind of robust to various things like Sybil attacks? What if I make like 100 million copies of myself? Like, do I get like 100 million more votes? If not, why? Things like that.
So, yes, we can talk about that sort of thing. We can talk about that thing in particular as like an idempotence criterion on our aggregation mechanism. That if you have two copies of the same thing being aggregated, that shouldn't make a difference. Yeah, and I guess in general, it's these open questions about meta ethics, about sort of how to take into consideration the values or preferences of different agents, are really relying on a lot of concepts of metaphors and intuitions that tend to get slippery, especially when we talk about AIs.
Yeah, and I kind of like are sort of obviously parochial, sort of very, very rooted in just like savannah,
right?
100,000 years ago. So it's like it's kind of important to think about this clearly. Like how do we generalize those?
Right.
Like, one like super interesting area to kind of explore, but it might be kind of too interesting to be productive. Is like this entire acausal coalitions concept. Like everyone could get a quick intro by reading Scott Alexander's Demiurge's older brother essay, where he describes an AI waking up and going like, "I'm not the first one." He's like, "Probably not. I should simulate who is the first one," and then he gets like into a simulated discussions about morality with that one. Like other like interesting kind of attractor spaces. Like human morality has evolved in Savannah as a game theoretic, as a result of some kind of game theoretic search.
Right.
And now the question is like, is that in that search space, can we identify like stronger invariants that also apply to like non-human agents, and can we build something that is kind of robust around those invariants? It's a super interesting area, I think.
Yeah. There's a few pieces of Andrew Critch's technical agenda, Arches, that pertain to this. That's a paper which lists something like 30 different technical problems that are related to different framings of AI alignment. And
highly endorsed.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I think it's great. There's a couple in there about ways of generalizing principles that that a lot of humans seem to have about loyalty to the processes that were causally critical to bringing us ourselves into existence, or about evolving the way that notions of reciprocity or cooperation evolved. And these are things that, obviously there's a lot of philosophical literature about. And yeah, one thing that I want to say, speaking to mathematicians in particular, is that philosophical literature is sort of, you don't need to read all of it, but there's basically some people have put in a lot of thought into trying to clarify these things, and they've gotten so far with it. But then you can take it further by applying the tools that the philosophers don't have. And I think this is really ripe. I think there's not a lot of people doing this, especially with the math 2.0 of category theory. The analytic philosophy tradition tries to do this with formal logic, but then it's sort of really under constrained still. And the more constraints we have in trying to figure out what the right concepts are, I think the more likely we'll find an answer that is sort of invariant to a bunch of different ways that one might try to arrive at it.
Yeah, I'm like big fan of sort of intersection of philosophy and math, and perhaps even more like philosophy and computer science. Like kind of like as Daniel Dennett has said, that computers keep philosophers honest, and this is like I think very deep observation, like more deep than it kind of sounds like. And that also kind of. But again, I guess to your earlier point that like in some ways it sounds like a constraint, but it really isn't. Like this is like if you kind of think about philosophical problems in the computer science framing, there are like a lot of avenues that immediately kind of open up that wouldn't be intuitive if you just try to kind of use your intuitions to guide you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I wonder if you could say more about what the advantage is of, supposing we do go through philosophical literature, apply computer science and math, and we get the right, find the right abstractions, as the workshop is titled. What good does that do for the development of AI in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's in some ways it's sort of an area where I feel kind of least confident about. I just like see that there is like a territory that hasn't been explored, and like who knows what's going to come up out of it. But we already kind of discussed things like sort of like things that where you kind of like make the fundamentals less confusing for the other research community. That seems like an obvious win to have. Then there might be things where you have kind of actual code that I'm a big fan of, like funding code in kind of philanthropic contexts, because that kind of, I mean, I could talk long about it, but like I think it kind of constrains philanthropy in a very valuable way. So like there might be like ways where you're gonna have like a category theoretical approach, and then kind of where you have some actual tools in form of computer code fall out from the other. And on the other hand, that then could be applied with the confidence of category theory minus the bugs, minus the implementation bugs, in context where they would be useful to constrain AI. So that I would be like very interested in seeing and funding myself. Yeah, and then this entire, I guess like the third one would be the entire mechanism design, trying to see like other ways how we can kind of pin down what's happening right now in the world in terms of incentive gradients that the world is climbing. Is there a way to be like more holistic instead of like having nonprofit try to undo the externalities that the for-profit sector is creating? Can we have like some more principled approach where we kind of design certain incentive landscape, then use nonprofit sector to fund the potential differences in potential, I guess, and then you have like kind of change the directory instead of like patching retroactively the damage that the for-profit sector does. And there again, principled thinking and mechanism design would be like super useful.
Right. Yeah. There's a sort of standard framework that you can apply from mechanism design or game theory in general, where you say there's a space of possible actions, there's a set of possible actions, there's a set of possible payoffs that everyone gets if depending on the combination of actions. But in a way, this is like an insufficiently structured setup to be scalable to a large world model. That we need some kind of richer language for expressing what the states of the world could be, which parts of the world are causally related to each other, what sorts of things are goals that different people might have.
So for example, I think like the something in that direction is that if you look at just read like Vitalik Buderin's writing about Nash equilibriums, like turns out like what blockchain people are discovering is that Nash equilibriums aren't that valuable, because like in real world, your main challenge isn't engineering Nash equilibriums, it's kind of guarding yourself against coalitions or collusion. Like basically making system collusion resistant is important. And once you have once you basically sort of forego this convenient assumption that there be no collusion, like you are in a situation where Nash equilibriums are no longer stable, and then you need to kind of like basically throw out most of the economic research and just like keep a bunch of it and start going from there. So that's an example of like real world presenting a very different picture, and blockchains again kind of like giving a very concrete playing ground.
Yeah, the Arch's agenda from Critch also has a strong emphasis relative to other things in this space on multi-agent scenarios. And there's, one perspective is you want to avoid having any coalitions, which is, sort of the blockchain libertarian attitude. Another perspective is you want to make sure that everyone joins the same coalition, which is sort of the dual perspective. And I think there's something interesting to be explored about ways in which those are equivalent, actually. But
and it kind of like super interesting, ties into this like cosmic perspective like, is there a coalition that is based on some kind of math invariance among agents in general? Like, should we kind of like should we be start to modify our behavior already in expectations of like hoping to get into a good coalition like that?
Right.
Sounds very science fiction, but like this is like one of those science fictions where I go like, wait a minute, is that true?
Yeah, I think it might be.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
One way that I've been putting this is that like in some ways we are really concerned. You kind of like in human terms, you can kind of distill the AI risk into fear of developing an asshole. So it's like you create an AI that's just like kind of wipes out humans in order to add another paperclip to its arsenal.
Right.
It's like that's like really asshole thing to do, right?
Right.
And like, but like theoretically, assholes are disfavored because like being an asshole makes kind of like you less valuable as a cooperation partner.
Right.
And like you start losing out a lot of the fruits from cooperation. Now the question is like, is that like a real incentive in some kind of math space?
Right.
And can we kind of rely on that observation and kind of encourage our AIs minimize the assholeness factor?
Right. I think it's a real incentive, exactly to the extent that we can understand it enough to implement it as a constraint on our development of AIs.
Exactly. Yeah.
It becomes then a selection pressure. If we're not able to get ourselves deconfused about what this thing actually is, then I think the incentive isn't there.
Yeah, so like we need a category theoretical concept of an asshole.
Yeah. Yeah, sort of defection or insensitivity or unaccountability. People use the word accountability in AI typically to refer to something where there's like some transparency and a person can review something and approve or disapprove. But I think there's also a deeper notion of accountability, which this kind of approval process is trying to approximate.
Yeah, intuitively, it sounds to me that there is some kind of there's like one important feature how kind of assholes and non-assholes in agent space are different is like how they treat their uncertainty. Like assholes tend to think about things that they're not certain and kind of interpret it as something that is going to go their way or something like that.
Or go the average way.
Yeah, or go there. Yeah. But like where somebody's like going like, wait a minute, I'm not certain if this is how this thing is going to go. So I'm being like more conservative from like social perspective here.
Right. Yeah, there's a sort of standard way of justifying conservativity. This is, I guess, the same basic argument as the Unilateralists curse, which is by Nick Bostrom, which just says that if you're part of a larger system and you're sort of making a decision about something that might impact everyone, then you should adjust. There's really actually a pretty good precise mathematical way in which you should adjust your prediction down of whether it would be good to do something like that. Because if everyone does this in the right way, well, if I say the negative version first, by default, if everyone acts according to their own beliefs, then the dangerous thing will happen more often than it should, because the person who is most wrong about it being dangerous.
He's the one who does it. Yeah.
It's analogous to the winner's curse, that whoever wins an auction is most likely to have overestimated the value of the object, so they'll probably be disappointed after they win.
Yeah, this is very, very close to what I had in mind about uncertainty. Yeah.
Yeah, but then in a sort of extremely powerful AI situation, it could be that all of the other agents sort of seem negligible or fully predictable in a way, and so that form of uncertainty, the sort of causal uncertainty, might not be enough. And then
I think you're going to like this territory of like Eliezer's counter argument to Stuart Russell about like fully updated deference, like So like the idea is that like Stuart's agenda is about like building uncertainty into AIs about what their objective function is, which is like a great idea and should be done, but like it's not enough.
Right.
Because like, once they get sufficient certainty about what's going on, they're still going to do the wrong thing. From our perspective.
Yeah, but why is that? Can you spell it out?
I have to kind of lean on my Eliezer's model here, and I might be just incorrect in that answer. Yeah. I guess you are. I mean, one concern is that the AI has just one general alignment problem is that the AI has just like takes its actions based on the wrong word model or wrong utility function, and by having this uncertainty, you will kind of alleviate this situation, but you do not get effectively introducing a race in the sense that you're hoping that the uncertainty is going to be there long enough for the word model and the value model to be sufficiently correct, but you don't actually have any guarantees. It might be kind of like the difference might be, get fully updated before you get to that point that you want to reach.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So I think that's where some kind of timeless or acausal uncertainty would need to come in, where it's not just deferring to the current the values as instantiated by the current humans, but some kind of reflective equilibrium of the humans who were there when the AI got created. Okay, yeah, I want to sort of conclude by putting this finding the right abstractions for human flourishing direction in context of what are all of the sort of promising avenues that you're interested in for reducing AI X risk, and where does this fit in?
Yeah, I think like there's just like so many promising ways, and like one great resource is just to go to Alignment Forum and see like what kind of tickles your interest there, which I think like a lot of good stuff is happening there. Yeah, and in general, I kind of want to kind of keep a sort of portfolio approach, and kind of support things that are like not have like high conviction in any approach. So in that sense, like having kind of category theorists to start coming in from like fairly unexplored direction seems like a very marginally great thing to do and support.
What else is in the portfolio?
Yeah, there are things like I mean, I got sort of semi-famous things like Paul Christiano's iterated distillation amplification. Like, I mean, Paul is awesome, obviously, and really thinking hard about how can we kind of do the bootstrapping, basically, and what are the properties that we need to kind of be confident in before we do that. Then there is like a more MIRI approach, which like some people have call it derogatory, like spherical co-approach. But on the other hand, I think like the sort of the much better way of viewing it is, as MIRI has been presenting, is like, let's figure out what the laws of gravity are before we start building spaceships, rather than just like getting them off the ground and then hoping to steer them down, kind of using enough feedback to steer them to another planet. So yeah, what are the invariants? And I think this is like where category theory could help a lot. And then like the entire kind of mechanism design, social fabric, international cooperation. I mean, for example, myself, I'm kind of deliberate to see like one of my assets is basically my brand as a neutral figure. And I'm literally right now sitting between Beijing and, I mean, equidistant between Beijing and New York. Washington is a little bit farther, but not much. so it's like kind of not part of the Anglo-Saxon usual suspects crowd, which is very helpful. I've already seen it being very helpful. So can I kind of maximize that? Like one thing that I've been thinking myself in that is like, what is my kind of invariant or my guiding star when I kind of think about facilitating cooperation. And one thing that I've reached out is, one thing that I've reached is kind of trying to think myself as someone who tries to align himself with future sentient beings in the light cone, in the future light cone. I have like a lot of uncertainty about how to do that precisely. I don't know how to aggregate over counterfactuals, for example. I think people who didn't get a chance to be born because of AI disaster should still get a vote.
Right.
And
right.
But like I think it's like intuitively feels like very attractive to me to be like if somebody gets like, okay, like, I mean, just an example, like somebody said like, what do you think about these horrible things that China is doing with AI? I was like, is that important, like from the future perspective? Like, yeah, but only in a second order sense.
Yeah.
Like the first order observation from the future generations point of view is that Chinese Communist Party, U.S. government, Catholic Church, they're just the most powerful human organizations, and like anything I can do to help them cooperate. When it comes to kind of species-wide issues, is going to just completely trump any kind of concerns that I might or might not have about kind of particular policies.
Yeah, sounds good. I agree. And on that note, thanks for your time, Jaan. And I look forward to seeing the abstractions that we come up with at the end of this workshop. I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit to discover.
Indeed. Thanks a lot.